The diner closed at 2 a.m. every night, but it was never empty at closing time. That was Anna's rule. The coffee's always hot, the doors stay open, and everyone who enters leaves with a full stomach. Tonight, however, something was different. The usual late-night truckers and insomniacs were nowhere to be seen. Instead, a single man sat in the corner booth, his face hidden behind a wide-brimmed hat. Anna had been watching him since he walked in an hour ago. He hadn't ordered anything. He hadn't moved. He just sat there, his hands resting on the table, fingers tapping a slow rhythm against the wood. "Can I get you something, Han?" she asked, forcing a smile as she approached. The man didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was low and gravelly, like distant thunder. "Just waiting." "For what?" she asked, her unease growing. The man tilted his head slightly, and for the first time, Anna noticed something odd. His fingers weren't tapping the table, they were carving into it. Perfectly straight lines, over and over, forming a pattern she didn't recognize. "For you," he said. Anna stumbled back, her heart racing. She glanced at the clock. 1:59 a.m. The diner lights flickered, plunging the room into brief darkness before buzzing back to life. The man was gone. The booth was empty except for the carving on the table, a spiral of jagged lines that seemed to twist and shift under the fluorescent lights. Then, the phone behind the counter rang. Anna hesitated before answering, her hands trembling. "Hello?" A voice, barely a whisper, crackled through the receiver. "Don't lock the door." The line went dead. The lights flickered again, and in the reflection of the diner's front window, Anna saw the man standing outside, staring in. His wide-brimmed hat cast a shadow over his face, but she could feel his eyes on her. The clock struck 2 a.m., and the lights went out completely. Tonight, however, something was different. The usual late-night truckers and insomniacs were nowhere to be seen. Instead, a single man sat in the corner booth, his face hidden behind a wide-brimmed hat. Anna had been watching him since he walked in an hour ago. He hadn't ordered anything. He hadn't moved. He just sat there, his hands resting on the table, fingers tapping a slow rhythm against the wood. "Can I get you something, Han?" she asked, forcing a smile as she approached. The man didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was low and gravelly, like distant thunder. "Just waiting." "For what?" she asked, her unease growing. The man tilted his head slightly, and for the first time, Anna noticed something odd. His fingers weren't tapping the table, they were carving into it. Perfectly straight lines, over and over, forming a pattern she didn't recognize. "For you," he said. Anna stumbled back, her heart racing. She glanced at the clock. 1:59 a.m. The diner lights flickered, plunging the room into brief darkness before buzzing back to life. The man was gone. The booth was empty except for the carving on the table, a spiral of jagged lines that seemed to twist and shift under the fluorescent lights. Then, the phone behind the counter rang. Anna hesitated before answering, her hands trembling. "Hello?" A voice, barely a whisper, crackled through the receiver. "Don't lock the door." The line went dead. Anna froze, staring at the diner's glass doors. The parking lot outside was empty, but something felt wrong. She grabbed the carving knife from under the counter and backed away, her pulse thundering in her ears. The clock struck 2 a.m. The lights went out completely, plunging the diner into darkness. Anna's breath quickened as she fumbled for her phone. The screen's glow illuminated the empty diner, casting long, flickering shadows. Then she heard it, a scraping sound, faint but deliberate, coming from the front door. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice trembling. No answer. The scraping grew louder, closer. It wasn't coming from the door anymore, it was inside. Anna turned toward the sound, holding her phone out like a shield. In the faint light, she saw it, the same jagged spiral, carved into the linoleum floor, extending toward her like an unholy map. At the center of the spiral stood the man. His hat was gone now, revealing hollow eyes that glowed faintly, like embers in a dying fire. His lips didn't move, but she heard his voice everywhere, inside her head, echoing through the diner. "You should have kept the doors open." Anna screamed and bolted for the back door. It wouldn't budge. The spiral seemed to grow beneath her feet, twisting and writhing like a living thing. The man raised his hand, and the carving knife flew from her grip, embedding itself into the counter. She felt an invisible force pulling her back, dragging her toward the center of the spiral. "No. Please," she cried, clawing at the floor. The man's eyes burned brighter, and the last thing Anna saw was his face twisting into a grotesque grin, his hollow eyes devouring her. The diner lights flickered back on. At 2:01 a.m., the booth in the corner was empty again. The spiral on the table had vanished, leaving behind only smooth, unmarked wood. A trucker pulled into the parking lot, hungry and tired, ready for a hot cup of coffee. The diner looked warm and inviting, its doors unlocked, as always. But no one was there to greet him. Story 2. Ben had been a cab driver in the city for years. The job was routine, long nights, short fares, and the occasional oddball passenger. But this shift felt different. The streets were unusually quiet, and an eerie fog blanketed the city, muffling the usual hum of traffic. He was about to call it a night when his meter pinged. The pickup was on the outskirts of town, at the edge of the forest where the streetlights were sparse. "Last fare," he muttered, turning his cab toward the pin on the map. The road grew darker as he approached the pickup spot. His headlights pierced the mist, revealing a figure standing at the side of the road. It was a woman in an old-fashioned black dress, her face pale and framed by long, dark hair. She raised her hand and Ben pulled over. "Need a ride?" he called out, leaning across the passenger seat. The woman didn't respond but opened the door and slid into the back seat. Her movements were smooth, almost too fluid, and her presence sent a chill through the car. "Where to?" Ben asked, glancing at her through the rearview mirror. She stared out the window, her face expressionless. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft and hollow. "Just drive." Ben hesitated but nodded, easing the cab back onto the road. The woman's eyes never left the window, and Ben couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Her reflection in the mirror seemed wrong. It wasn't the fog or the dim light, her image flickered, like static on a broken TV. "You live out here?" he asked, trying to break the silence. "No," she said flatly. The road stretched on, winding deeper into the woods. The fog thickened, and Ben realized he didn't recognize where he was. The GPS had gone blank, the screen displaying only a spinning loading symbol. "You sure we're going the right way?" he asked, his voice betraying his unease. The woman finally turned to face him, her eyes dark and unblinking. "You'll see." A loud thud startled him as something hit the roof of the cab. He slammed the brakes, his heart racing. "What the hell was that?" he muttered, gripping the steering wheel. He turned to look at the woman, but the back seat was empty. "Ma'am?" he called out, his voice cracking. The door hadn't opened, and there was no way she could have left without him noticing. The thud came again, followed by the sound of scraping metal. Ben's breath quickened as he glanced up at the rearview mirror. A dark shape was crawling across the roof, its long limbs and pale skin barely visible through the fogged glass. "Nope, nope, nope," he muttered, slamming the gas pedal. The cab lurched forward, tires screeching on the wet pavement. Whatever was on the roof clung tightly, its weight shifting as it moved toward the windshield. Ben's headlights caught the creature's face, if it could be called a face. Its features were stretched and distorted, its eyes too wide and its mouth twisted into a grotesque grin. It slammed a hand against the glass, leaving behind streaks of black ichor that oozed down the windshield. "Get off!" Ben shouted, swerving wildly. The creature didn't budge. Instead, it pressed its face against the glass, its grin widening as if it enjoyed his fear. In a desperate move, Ben jerked the wheel, sending the cab careening off the road. The vehicle skidded to a stop in a ditch, and the creature was flung off, disappearing into the trees. Ben sat in stunned silence, his chest heaving. The fog was lifting, and for a moment, he thought he was safe. But then, from the shadows of the forest, he heard it. Laughter. Soft at first, but growing louder. He looked back at the road and saw her standing there, the woman in black, her face as blank and pale as before. She raised her hand, pointing directly at him, and then vanished, leaving only her laughter echoing in the night. The cab's engine sputtered and the dashboard lights flickered. When Ben finally worked up the courage to restart the car, he drove straight home, swearing he'd never pick up another fare. But the next morning, when he checked his rearview mirror, a single black handprint was smeared across the back window. Story 3. Eric wasn't supposed to be out this late, but the shortcut through the woods would save him 20 minutes. His GPS warned him about the unmarked road, but he'd driven through worse before. The trees loomed tall on either side, their bare branches clawing at the sky. The gravel crunched under his tires, the only sound breaking the suffocating silence. His headlights carved narrow beams through the darkness, and for a moment, Eric thought he was entirely alone. Until he saw her. A woman stood on the side of the road, her white dress glowing faintly in the dim light. She didn't wave or call out, but her presence was unmistakable. Eric hesitated. His gut told him to keep driving, but his conscience pulled at him. She looked lost, alone. He slowed the car and rolled down his window. "Need some help?" he asked, his voice sounding too loud in the still night. The woman didn't respond. Her face was obscured by a curtain of long, dark hair. Eric leaned out slightly. "Ma'am? Are you okay?" She raised her head slowly, her face pale and gaunt, her eyes sunken as if she hadn't slept in years. "Please. Take me home," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Eric swallowed hard, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. Something about her voice sent a shiver down his spine, but he nodded. "Sure, hop in." She opened the door and slid into the back seat. The air in the car grew colder immediately, and Eric resisted the urge to look at her in the rearview mirror. "Where to?" he asked. "Just keep driving," she murmured. The road stretched on, and Eric couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. His GPS was glitching, the screen flickering between static and a blank map. He glanced in the mirror and caught a glimpse of her reflection. Her face was tilted down, but her lips were moving, whispering something he couldn't understand. "Hey," he said, his voice cracking. "You all right back there?" She stopped whispering but didn't answer. The fog thickened, swallowing the road ahead. Eric's headlights barely cut through the mist now, and he felt the tires slide slightly on the gravel. Then, the whispers returned, louder this time, filling the car like a low hum. Eric's pulse quickened as he realized it wasn't just her voice. There were others, overlapping, growing in intensity. "Ma'am, I'm gonna need you to." She was gone. The back seat was empty. Eric slammed on the brakes, his heart pounding. The car skidded to a stop, and he turned to look over his shoulder. The woman stood in the middle of the road, staring at him. "How?" he muttered, but before he could finish, she raised her hand, pointing at something behind him. Eric's blood ran cold. Slowly, he turned to face the windshield. Standing just beyond the hood of his car were dozens of figures, their outlines barely visible through the fog. Each one was cloaked in shadow, their eyes glowing faintly. They didn't move, but their presence pressed against him like a crushing weight. The whispers grew deafening. Eric threw the car into reverse, spinning the tires as he backed away. The figures didn't follow, but their eyes stayed fixed on him, burning like embers in the dark. When he finally turned the car around, the road was clear. He floored the gas pedal, the gravel flying beneath his tires. He didn't stop until he reached the main road, the open sky above him a welcome relief. But when he pulled into his driveway, his relief was short-lived. The passenger door was still open, swinging slightly in the breeze. And in the back seat, scrawled in the condensation on the window, were 3 words. "Take us home." Story 4. Emma worked the night shift at a small-town gas station. It wasn't glamorous, but the pay was decent, and the nights were usually quiet. Most of her customers were truckers passing through or locals grabbing a quick snack. Tonight, though, was different. The clock had just struck midnight when the landline behind the counter rang. The phone never rang. Emma hesitated before picking it up. "Hello," she said, her voice uncertain. A faint, static-filled voice responded. "Is he there yet?" "Who?" Emma asked, her brow furrowing. The line went dead. She stared at the receiver for a moment before hanging up. Probably a prank, she thought, shaking her head. The rest of the night was uneventful until 2:33 a.m., when a man entered the store. He was tall and thin, his face gaunt, with deep-set eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. His clothes were old-fashioned, a threadbare suit that looked decades out of style. "Evening," Emma said, forcing a smile. "Can I help you with something?" The man didn't respond. He walked to the back of the store, his footsteps echoing in the empty aisles. Emma watched him on the security monitor. He wasn't shopping, he just stood there, staring at the cooler full of bottled water. "Sir," she called out. "Do you need help finding something?" Still no response. She decided to approach him, her nerves tingling. "Sir, if you're not going to..." The man was gone. The cooler door was open, cold air spilling out onto the floor. Emma glanced around, but the store was empty. Her stomach turned. She locked the front door and returned to the counter, trying to shake off the unease. At 3 a.m., the phone rang again. Her hand trembled as she picked it up. "Hello?" This time, the voice was clearer but no less unsettling. "He's inside." Emma's heart stopped. Who's inside?" The line went dead again. A loud crash echoed from the back of the store. Emma jumped, nearly dropping the phone. "Hello?" she called out, her voice shaking. No answer. She grabbed the flashlight from under the counter and stepped cautiously toward the noise. One of the shelves had toppled over, spilling snacks and canned goods onto the floor. "Is someone back there?" She swung the flashlight beam around the store, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The beam landed on the cooler. The door was open again, and standing inside, between rows of bottled water, was the man. His head tilted sharply, his sunken eyes staring directly at her. Emma screamed and bolted back to the counter, slamming the panic button under the register. The alarm didn't go off. The lights flickered, plunging the store into momentary darkness. When they came back on, the man was standing in front of the counter, his pale face inches from hers. Emma stumbled back, her legs giving out beneath her. "What do you want?" she cried. The man's lips curled into a grotesque smile. He leaned closer, his cold breath brushing her cheek as he whispered, "Just watching." The lights flickered again and he was gone. The store was silent except for Emma's ragged breathing. When the morning shift arrived, they found her sitting on the floor behind the counter, clutching the flashlight. She never worked the night shift again. Story 5. Daniel had been desperate for a place to stay. His job required constant travel, and cheap motels were his go-to solution. The Sunrise Inn was nothing special. Faded carpets, flickering lights, but it was cheap, and that was good enough. The woman at the front desk handed him the key to room 304. "Just you tonight?" she asked with a polite smile. "Yeah, just me," Daniel replied. Her smile faltered slightly, but she said nothing else as he headed up the creaky staircase. The hallway smelled faintly of mildew, and the walls were lined with faded floral wallpaper. Daniel walked to the end of the hall and unlocked room 304. It was as basic as he'd expected. A single bed, a dresser, and a small TV that looked older than he was. A door on the far wall led to the bathroom. He dropped his duffel bag on the bed and sat down, pulling out his phone. There was no Wi-Fi signal, of course. He sighed, turning on the TV instead. As the static-filled screen flickered to life, a faint knock came from the bathroom door. Daniel froze. "Hello?" he called out, his voice shaky. No answer. He stood up slowly, his eyes fixed on the bathroom. The door was slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness visible through the crack. "Is someone in there?" he asked, his heart pounding. The knock came again, louder this time. Summoning his courage, Daniel approached the door and pushed it open. The bathroom was empty. The mirror was fogged up, as if someone had recently taken a shower, but the sink and floor were bone dry. Daniel backed out of the bathroom, his unease growing. He decided to sleep with the lights on. As he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the knocking returned. This time, it wasn't coming from the bathroom. It was coming from the closet. Daniel sat up, his pulse racing. "Whoever's in there, you need to leave," he shouted, grabbing the lamp from the nightstand. The knocking stopped. He approached the closet cautiously, the lamp held like a weapon. The door was plain and unremarkable, but something about it made his skin crawl. He gripped the handle and yanked the door open. The closet was empty, but at the very back, scratched into the wood, was a single word: "Stay." The room's temperature plummeted, and Daniel's breath clouded in the air. A faint whisper filled the room, coming from everywhere and nowhere. "Stay, stay with us." Daniel stumbled back, dropping the lamp. He grabbed his bag and bolted out of the room, slamming the door behind him. The hallway was unnervingly silent as he raced toward the stairs. But when he reached the ground floor, the lobby was empty. The front desk, the chairs, even the potted plant by the window, gone. Instead, the room was lined with doors, each one identical to room 304. "Stay, stay with us." The whisper grew louder, echoing around him. He tried the front door, but it wouldn't budge. Behind him, one of the doors creaked open, revealing the dark, empty room beyond. Daniel's scream echoed through the empty lobby as the door swung shut, leaving no trace of him behind. The sun rose and remained quiet, its flickering sign glowing faintly in the night, waiting for the next guest.